Hello, good morning, everyone here and on Zoom. I'm Cosette Burns-Alonso. I'm a fellow at Penn Libraries affiliated with SIMS. It is my pleasure to welcome you back to the second panel this morning on the topic of avatars and to introduce our two speakers. The first speaker on this panel is Dominique Stutzmann, a professor at Humboldt University in Berlin and director of research at the Institut de Recherche et d'Histoire des Textes, where he is a senior researcher and specialist in Latin paleography and digital humanities. His current research focuses on French graphic systems and their evolution during the 12th through 15th centuries, in addition to artificial paleography and digital methods that employ artificial intelligence and computer science to identify graphic forms and perform handwritten text recognition. He is the principal investigator on a number of major research projects at the intersection of humanities and computer science that have been supported by the European Commission and City of Paris, and recently organized a summer school on medieval books through the lens of quantitative methods. His paper today is titled Scrolling Through Scrolls and Books in Books of Hours. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Stutzmann.
Hi, thank you, Cosette, for this introduction. And thank you all. I'm very thrilled to be among you and to be back in Philadelphia. It has been so long. And to be at the Schoenberg Institute for the launch of Basira. In manuscripts from the late Middle Ages, the book emerges as an iconographic element that appears to be omnipresent, often overshadowed in the descriptions and neglected because it is omnipresent. Sometimes it is an incongruity in the miniature that captures the attention of art historian. Yesterday we saw a Chinese scholar with the ox, and today I'm showing you the Virgin Mary reading on a donkey. While I was preparing this talk, I mentioned to my colleague and friend Hannah Weissman that I had come across a miniature showing this Virgin on the donkey during the flight into Egypt, and he informed me that he knew the miniature I was mentioning, and he immediately sent me his paper on this miniature, and realized that he was not thinking about the same miniature as I did. So we end up having two miniatures with this iconographic motif. So he was discussing Brussels manuscripts 4315, attributing it to the Master of the Prayer Book of Dresden, while I was referring to the Baltimore manuscript W194, attributed to the Circle of Simon Marmion. As you will see, the chromatic treatment of both miniature are really different, but the scenic arrangement and all other details confirm the known collaborations between the two masters. But here we have some evidence that had been overlooked by art historian until now. So this iconographic motive of the book is opening new opportunities to deal with miniatures, art history, and identification. And so if the motive, this pattern allows for attribution of works or identification of iconographic reprisal, it also holds a deeper meaning, because in the Christian universe, of course, the book is evidently not a neutral object. The book is an integral part of narration, of the salvation narration, being the incarnation of the word. Laura Salvate-Miles had studied how the book, both as a symbol of God's incarnation and as a support of prayer and symbol of interiority, has become a standard iconographic pattern in the scene of Annunciation. Miles reminds us that theologians such as Bernard of Clairvaux, in his 4 treatises in Laudibus Virginis Matris Supermissus Est, do not mention the Virgin that the Virgin was reading when she was surprised by the angel. even if the iconography is attested in the 12th century. So there are different paths of the theological tradition, and the book takes another meaning in the strand of theology that presents the Virgin as the figure that should be imitated, especially by nuns and recluses, and then from that point by all women. Virtually, in this idealized situation of the Virgin being the incarnation of piety, she could held a book at any time, on a donkey, as we saw, at the nativity, as we see here, instead of taking care of our child, which, by associating the Virgin with the book and reading, a social model is promoted where the woman is neither active nor reflective, but available. And here we see an older example on the left side from the northern French on Liège diocese, and some later examples where Joseph and Mary also have a servant to take care of the child. Sometimes the Virgin is holding a book while visiting her cousin Elizabeth. Here I'm very pleased to you see how it's highlighted here. I hadn't seen the book before, and the computer told me here there is something that's a book. So that's nevertheless, those situations are quite rare at nativity or the visitation. I will come to that, back to that later. 3 questions arise that will structure my presentation. First, now that we know that this research about book symbolism and the presence of the book is relevant, if we wanted to search for all miniatures representing, let's say, a flight into Egypt with book, with the Virgin reading, what would we do? That will be my first part, and I will demonstrate that artificial intelligence can now effectively come to our aid and to identify multiple representations of the book and navigate through this sheer mass of representations. The second question I will ask is how to interpret our results and the presence or situations of the book. As I'm not an art historian, I will maybe be too shallow on that in my second part, but I hope to provide you with new information and new food for thought in this great conference. And well, I will present some cases where the clear contrast of situations and representations allow us to discover modification or reassignations of iconography to specific people. And in a brief final section, I will show how the combination of the systematic approach of AI changes the perspectives of analysis and also imposes a flexible reflection. So now, as you can see on my slides, we can scroll through thousands of representations of scrolls and books or codices in books of hours and in the miniatures. The succession of 6,000 representation of writing there that you have seen, well, to be precise, it's based on a corpus of 18,206 miniatures and almost 8,000 with detected elements of writing. I've manually validated almost 7,000 annotations on 4,600 images in 700 manuscripts. So that's large. Obviously, I will not explain or show the detail of all. I will just here mention where it all comes from. I was the happy principal investigator in the Hawaii Hours Recognition Analysis Edition research project. What is on the screen is a screenshot of my online database, where there is a census of 8,900 books of hours in public collections. But the that is sort of a secondary effect of this project, but the main goal was to have a census of digitally available books of hours, to have them read by a machine, and in order to study the text circulation and hybridation of books and liturgical uses. You see here on the right side an automated transcription of a page. So from that point, we can perform some automated cataloging and identification of the text, the pieces that are inside each and every office, instead of saying that's the hours of the Virgin for the use of Rome, saying it's the hours for the Virgin for the use of Rome, but psalms in Matins are exchanged with psalms from Bruges, for example. So that was my goal. And to be able to read the text, I had to remove the miniatures. So that's why we spotted the miniatures to start. Then, of course, it's relevant to know what is in the miniatures. So I also trained a miniature classifier, which is able to tell, despite the sheer variety of implementations, which are the 13 main classes of topics in books of hours, as you will know: Annunciation, Visitation, Nativity, Annunciation to the Shepherds, etc., and including David in Prayer, Crucifixion, Pentecost, and the Funeral Office, which are not in the infancy cycle, but still very common. So that's something I will not be dealing with today. What I've done for specifically for this conference is that I have trained some models to detect writing and writing forms in miniatures. I started with the 6 classes that are proposed by the Bazira ontology. So bandroll, codex, horn, book, scroll, single sheet document, and wooden tablet codex. And I've added 2 classes because it was of interest for me: the titulus crucis and text otherwise, meaning text that is on the background or on something, but that is not specifically secluded from the representation by any means. So I've trained 4 models. The first one with Marion Charpier, who was an intern with me in Berlin. And so the overall performance is very good. So it's very good to detect where there are writing in a miniature. We had a drop in the precision with in the larger corpora. That is not due to the standard problem of overfitting, but rather the contrary. Medieval manuscripts are maybe too diverse, and if you want a bandroll that is in the architectural arch on the upper right hand, then the system has to be trained to recognize something that is nothing as a bandroll, and then it will predict bandrolls where there are no bandrolls. But actually not that much. So it's still fun to validate. And well, that's the basis of this talk. Among the variety in medieval miniatures, I also want to mention the splendid book of hours of the Rohan family by the master of the hours of Rohan. You have oversized books situations that are very unlikely to appear. The situation on the left part is in the Basira database, but also the book at the, on the Golgotha below Christ. It's really a representation of this incarnation of word that's the Holy Spirit incarnated in some way. So that's one part of the difficulties. A second is that our notions are not clearly defined, and we had the discussion just before. We have arbitrary distinctions between bandroll and scrolls, because they look the same, but the difference is mainly functional, not graphic or physical. Bandroll are there to give spoken words or to identify a person on the miniature with the name. And if blank, it's an identification by connotation. But if it's blank, it may be a scroll or a bandroll. Here, just a fun fact, there is a bandroll which was correctly identified as a bandroll by the computer, but the text on the bandroll is incorrect because it's not Luke that who is writing, but the bandroll says Sanctum Lucam, sorry. And then how do we decide if there is some text for an evangelist? If you have Secundum Ioannem, so it's the start of the gospel, so it will be a scroll. But if you have S. and an abbreviation on John, then you don't know if it's an identification or a scroll. Well, that's something that is obviously letting the accuracy of our system drop. Here, another ambiguous case. You have the eagle holding something that is clearly a bandroll, but with the text of the gospel. So it is a scroll that is taken into heaven. Now, another case of ambiguity are the angels. Starting from the left, of course, we think that angels are not writing and not reading, they are just chanting, praising, and if you have music, then it should be because they are singing. It should be, but if you zoom in, then you see that the music and the words are not always presented for the reader of the manuscripts, but for the angels. And sometimes the angels have a book, so that's where you know that angels are reading, they are not just singing. And also in the difficulties, you have the artistic freedom, which is why we're happy to work with manuscripts. But when the text of the manuscript is a scroll, then what do you expect the computer to do? To identify it as a scroll or to leave it out because that's not what you are interested in? You also see in the artistic freedom the mural writing, for example, which was studied by our colleague Katia Ayraxinen-Monnier. I have no more examples of that she hasn't published, and it's not, well, it's uncommon, but at the from 1495 it becomes more common, and so that's exactly the sort of thing that we will want to explore with the help of AI, because it's not feasible to go back to 10,000 books of ours and to check if by any chance in the hundreds and thousands of miniatures you have mural writing. So that's exactly where AI can help us and has helped me coming here to Philadelphia. And also find some distinctive features. One that I want to show is this, because both scenes are very similar in the sense that you have a female patron in front of the Virgin and the Child, on the left and a male patron on the right. The difference here is that the codex of the woman impedes her to interact with the Virgin, while the scroll is a link between the Virgin and the male patron. It seems to be random, but well, the first time I saw that, I thought it was random, but I don't believe it anymore. Because I will show other examples of scrolls being the occasion of interaction. And well, not here, that's another distinction I want to make. The case about the evangelist, which was actually my starting point. I noticed a long time ago that Saint John was represented with scrolls more than the other evangelists. And this is particularly true with those miniatures which have a synoptic representations of the evangelists, where you have Saint John on the upper left with a scroll and the others with books. But that's also true in many cycles of the four evangelists in different miniatures, like here in the Hours of Louis of Savoy, or here, well, I have hundreds of this, well, not hundreds, but at least 50 examples like that I will spare you. And the day before yesterday at the Free Library, that's exactly what we got to see. I knew the manuscript, but I just show pictures that I made this week in Philadelphia. That's we have to be aware that it's never a law. So you have examples against it. Here, for example, St. John is, well, it's not exactly a codex, but it's a single sheet document. And you have Matthew, which is was interacting with his angel, thanks to the scroll. And that is something that we find several times. The angel is interacting, and the scroll is going into the codex. Of course, it's easier for an angel to hold a scroll than for an ox or an eagle. But still, I believe this scroll thing is correlated with interaction and a link. And I wasn't aware of that before preparing this talk. And if it's known to the literature, then I apologize for being naive. But I think it's a bit new. So here again, an interaction between the angel and his evangelist, and St. John with the scroll. So just to remind us that it's the common shape. It's not universal. So statistically speaking, it will really depend if you are in northern France or in Germany or in Italy. So it's a regional thing. A third distinctive feature I was made aware of is that the representation of Catherine of Alexandria has evolved. And it's interesting because there is a paper on the iconography of Catherine that was published not so long ago. And it's mentioned that Catherine is often holding a book. Catherine is a fake saint from the Catholic Church, hasn't existed, but is derived from a Greek Neoplatonist philosopher, a female philosopher, which was killed by Christian people. And this conflation of personae made her being acknowledged in the Christian tradition as being a scholar. So book is one of the attributes, but you would expect to have the broken wheel or a sword. Broken wheel is the main attribute. Nevertheless, at the end of the Middle Ages, you see some representation of Saint Catherine without the wheel. Here, the wheel is starting to disappear at the floor. But especially in the royal entourage, you have Saint Catherine with a book and a sword. Here in the Book of Prayers of Anne de Bretagne, and here probably linked, you see the same garment on Saint Catherine, and again the sword and the book and no wheel. So it's a new iconography. In any case, it means that the book has here a specific significance. It's not a random attribute, and it's replacing the wheel. And it's sort of a visual exegesis just on this saint. Again, like for the evangelists, who have to be careful, even in the circle of the miniatures around Anne de Bretagne, you still have Catherine with the wheel. So it's not excluding, it's an additional layer of meaning. Borderline case are the Apostle Peter and Paul. I haven't seen any rationale beyond the distribution, but we have to be aware that the writings of Peter as apostle are very scarce. You have 2 letters, so why would you represent him with a book? So we have all situations. Statistically speaking, it's not clear, but I think there is something to delve into here, nevertheless. And last point, we discussed yesterday book being an attribute of God, and I think it's the representation of the Liber Viventium, the book of the living. So you will have many representation of God holding the book in any sort of appearance. That's something Basira can help work with, of course. And just an additional topic as the titulus crucis, so the this epigraphic situation within miniatures, where you have a display of script as being to be read by surrounding people within the miniature. And there are some few cases, but I think it's not random, where the Latin script is clearly a Latin script, so it's not pseudo script, but it's broken and square like you would expect from Hebrew script. So 2 examples here, and it appears technically by breaking the letter R into 1 straight line and 1 dot, which is like the yod in Hebrew. So you've seen from the evangelist to Saint Catherine to the titulus crucis to God, this broad view on books can open new doors for further analysis. And so changing the perspectives is not only having more material at hand. I would argue that it's also looking not only at what is there, but what could be there and what is therefore absent. For example, in most Pentecost representations, you have the Virgin, which is not mentioned by the Bible at Pentecost. You have the Virgin and books on the floor. That's a standard representation for the Pentecost. Most of time, the Virgin has books, 1 book in front of her, or is reading a book. Our splendid master, again, is having a maybe more truthful access to the Pentecost representation without the Virgin. But then look at it, the Pentecost is full of books, but not that much for the apostles. There is only 1 book by the apostles, but the blue background, those are angels chanting, and are chanting from books and scrolls. And what is appearing in Pentecost is a scroll that is between apostles and God. The Holy Spirit is on top with God. So on the one hand, it's a complete bizarre representation of the Pentecost. And you have to, we can ask what this painter had in mind. But we also can ask now, what were his habits in representing books in miniatures? And so that's this statistical view on what painters would imagine as being fitting into a miniature. So here you have for each manuscript the number of miniatures I have annotated, and the numbers of scrolls, codices, whatever you have in the miniature. And you see that it's not at all a one-to-one relation. Some painters have many more books than others. So if you have to interpret what is in one single miniature, you have to understand what the painter's habits were, and if the book is still meaning something for this particular topic, or if it's just an iconographic habit. Books, I've said it in the introduction, may virtually appear anywhere, but they do not. And that's something that is fascinating to me. For example, it's rare that the Virgin is reading on a donkey. Well, that's not really feasible. It's not practical. But at the presentation to the temple, anyone could hold a book. I know only 3 examples where there are books in this scene, and those are 3 late examples. In one case, the book is closed, and in the 2 other, the books is shown to the viewer, not to the scene. So, meaning this scene doesn't need a book, and if you have a book, it's referring to something else. I have on that 2 hypotheses right now. One is that the Gospel of Luke mentions that she had to go to the temple because it's the law. So it may be a book referring to the law, but we could expect a scroll at this point. Or it's an allusion to the fact that it's when Simeon is starting the Nunc Dimittis here, which will be integrated to the liturgy. So what we may be facing may be a liturgical book for later Christian viewers. But that's really a Renaissance interpretation. And again, there's among hundreds of representation, I only know 3 with books on this presentation to the temple. So I wrap up to conclude. AI can spot patterns, including books and writing in medieval and Renaissance art. So we will have fun time in the coming months. It will help expanding the Basira database. As was recognized in previous talks, and also this intuition of the Basira database, books, even if they are common objects and patterns, convey a meaning, and they are not they are not just decoration. I've shown some examples with John the Evangelist, the scrolls in interaction, St. Catherine, the literacy of St. Catherine, and also working on a systematic food is changing the perspective, because we can see what is there and what is not, and what we would expect, and it rebalances our way of interpreting those graphic artifacts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to introduce the second speaker on this panel, Sabina Zonno. is Research Associate in European Art at the Huntington. She received her PhD in art history from the University of Padua in Italy and has taught courses at the University of Southern California, California Lutheran University, and the University of Padua, and has also been a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley and USC. Her work has been supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Samuel Crest Foundation, the American Philosophical Society, and the International Center of Medieval Art. She's the author of numerous articles in English and Italian, and recently curated the exhibition In Our Time, Prints by R.B. Kitaj, on view in the Huntington Art Gallery until March 4th, 2024. Her talk this morning is titled Virtual Manuscripts in Virtual Spaces. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Zonno.
Thank you for this kind introduction, Cousine, and thank you to Lynn and also to Nick for inviting me today. Today I'm wearing my USC hat, actually, but you're welcome to come to the Huntington and say hi. So at USC, I'm directing a project of virtual reality, which is focused on manuscripts. Every time we as scholars have the opportunity to access a medieval or Renaissance manuscript, we can have a personal and embodied experience of the book, an experience that we may remember viscerally. But this opportunity results from the privilege we have as scholars to access manuscript collections, being granted permission by curation institutions to examine the originals in person. And this permission often depends on our personal and professional connections, on the institution's ability to provide access when we need it, thanks to the resources they can invest in terms of staff, space, on the condition of the manuscript and its availability. In order to access manuscript collections, we often travel, which may be expensive, and in some cases, we need to gain permission to cross political borders, which may be complicated. Plus, traveling always implies a huge carbon footprint, which has a global impact. In addition, traveling can be a challenge for people with mobility and physical impairments. With these ideas in mind and thinking about accessibility and sustainability, in 2020, I started working on this digital humanities project called the Virtual Reality Global Library at the University of Southern California, together with Professor Lynn Dodd and a team formed by USC faculty members, scholars, and students from several departments at USC. This collaborative project has been funded twice by the NIH, and it is still in progress. The goal of this project consists in creating immersive and interactive virtual reality experiences of medieval and Renaissance manuscripts, experiences that can be accessed through virtual reality headsets like this. Can I ask how many of you have ever tried one of these? Ooh, so many, nice. Once you wear one, so as you know, and I hope you will be willing to try the experience during lunch break, you find yourself in a virtual space. And once you are inside the virtual reality experience we built, you will find yourself in front of a virtual model of an original manuscript. The first virtual reality experience of a manuscript that we built was focused on a book of hours from USC manuscript collection, which I studied in my postdoc at USC some years ago. It is a modestly decorated book of hours from the Southern Low Countries, one of many books of hours produced in the area in the 15th century. But it is a book that looks particularly interesting to me because of my interest in manuscripts used by and produced for women. The manuscript contains indeed a note of ownership that we will see a little bit later in Middle Dutch, possibly written in the early 16th century by a woman named Grieken Becks, who lived in a great beguinage. Here is another image of the original manuscript, which I added simply because there's a book portrayed in the Annunciation, which could be included in Basira. And I also thought you may appreciate seeing another image of this little-known manuscript. Now, what you see here on the left is the virtual model of the Book of Hours from USC Special Collections that we produced. The virtual book we created with photogrammetry which consists in taking hundreds of overlapping photographs of the manuscript and its pages from different positions and angles. Then the pictures are imported into a software for image alignment to create a mesh that is textured and finally exported as a 3D file. That's how our engineers come very useful. Essentially, the virtual model of the USC Book of Hours is born from a combination of a 3D model and parchment simulation, which affords real-time page turner by user. So once you are in the experience, the book is interactive and you can turn the pages and explore the book. On the right, you see a scholar wearing this relatively inexpensive virtual reality headset, which now even Costco sells for $300. The scholar is experiencing the virtual book in the virtual space. Now I will show you a video of the virtual reality experience of the Book of Hours. And I'm very hopeful that during our lunch break, there will be 3 headsets available and you can try it yourself. So once you wear the headset, that's what you see. We are in a church and you will find a virtual model of the Book of Hours in front of you. I will explain later why the church and the Book of Hours. The book is laying on a prie-dieu, whose design was inspired by 15th century prie-dieus portrayed in coeval illuminated manuscript and paintings. And here you can really appreciate the high resolution of the virtual reality model. And also on the left side, we decided to add the 2D images that are in sync with the book. So as soon as you turn the pages on the left, which are larger and more readable, will change. We also added a magnifying glass that allows you to interact with the book and appreciate the details. And I will show you later the improved version of the magnifying glass that we are currently building. But essentially, we're trying to replicate the experience that the scholar has in front of a real book when we are trying to really appreciate and get in touch with the details of the illuminations and the text. And we were also able to replicate the effect of the gold that kind of changes depending on your position and the movement, your personal movement with the virtual reality headset. And then on your right, you'll find a menu that allows you to access transcriptions in Latin of the prayers, translations into English and Spanish. And once you turn the pages, the transcriptions or translations, depending on what you selected, will change. Obviously, these are contents that we manually import, and contents that can change depending on the kind of book we will have in the experience. Here you see how the manuscript is interactive and complaining about the way in which you are turning the pages. Not good for its preservation. You can also see the space. The thing I need to say, and I will reiterate this later, is that we can have any book in any space. So currently we have this old placeholder image of a church, but we could have any virtually reconstructed space and any book in any space, because this is also a template that can welcome other books and other space. With the magnifying glass, you can also appreciate the marks of badges that were once attached to the book and the imprints on the facing pages. And as you can see, the way in which the parchment behaves is not exactly like parchment. We use the best, it's called Unity hobby cloth. Now you're seeing the virtual hands that you can use. These are your own hands that the headset can see once you put down the controllers. So there are 2 ways of using the book, either with the controllers, which allows you to hold the page and turn, but also with your real hands, virtual hands in the experience. I want to go back to the parchment because it's something I really care about. It's one of the biggest challenges we have, describing the parchment in VR, which means being able to really represent the way in which each page behaves. And we know that the parchment is different. It changes from book to book. In the same book, we have different pages that behave in different ways, that are thicker or slimmer or stiffer. So we currently use the program called Unity Hobby Cloth, that is the most advanced cloth simulator, which is usually used to replicate clothing in virtual reality. But as we all know, cloth is not parchment. So our engineers have been working very hard on trying to make the hobby cloth behave in a way that is much more similar to parchment, and we're still working on that. You also can hear the music that is appropriate to the book, and it's a way in which we can really improve the immersive aspect of the VR. What is really exciting is that this virtual reality experience of the Book of Hours from USC Special Collections is also a template, as I mentioned, that can be used to create any other virtual reality experience of any other manuscript in other virtual spaces. So essentially, we can modify the experience so that any book can be placed in any space. Now let your imagination run wild. Which book would you like to see and in which space you would like to experience it? And let me know later. Imagine placing a manuscript in its original context. Perhaps it is a still existing and mainly intact medieval space. Perhaps it is a space that has changed throughout the centuries. But it can be also a space that doesn't exist anymore and can be virtually reconstructed. In the case of our virtual reality experience of the USC Book of Hours, the virtual book has been temporarily set, as I mentioned, in a placeholder image of the Church of Antwerp, which Nick easily recognized in New York when he first saw the experience. Because you are still working on the reconstruction of the virtual space that is more appropriate to the Book of Hours. On the left, you see the note of ownership that I mentioned earlier. What we know about the provenance of this manuscript at the core of this first experience is that it was possibly made in Ghent in the mid-15th century. That's what the calendar, the litany, and the style of the illumination suggest. In her note of ownership, Ricken Becks, the book owner, mentions that she lived in a great beguinage, possibly the old St. Elizabeth Great Beguinage in Ghent, which was the only great beguinage in Ghent in the early 16th century, unless the manuscript left the city and was used by this woman somewhere else. Here you see a 17th century map of the beguinage on the right. Even if the buildings in the old St. Elizabeth beguinage still exist in Ghent, both the church and the private houses of the Begins have drastically changed. The city is renting these buildings in the beguinage, and most of them have been remodeled and have changed a lot. We are thus working on the design of a private room in a beguinage building. What you see here is one of the most recent versions of the room model created by one of our architecture students. It is supposed to be a space that evokes the idea of a Beguin's private room in which the users of the virtual reality experience can focus on the manuscript that is at the core of the experience. The ceiling, the floor, and the fireplace that you see in the virtual model of the room have been designed looking at still existing 16th and 17th century buildings in Ghent or in the area of Ghent, and taking into consideration archaeological findings from the excavations of beguinage in the area. That's how we selected the tiles on the floor, for example. In designing this room, we considered the still existing beguinage rooms, such as this one in Diest, but also painted spaces in coeval Flemish and Dutch paintings and illuminations, like the one from the Metz collection. And we are also considering adding to the virtual space some furniture inspired by still existing furniture pieces or objects connected to the life of beguines, as in the case of the miniature crib of the infant Jesus, again from the mat. Now, I will offer a preview of the progress of the project in this second phase that is currently happening. With the intention of extending the exploration of the manuscript and providing users with what they may need to examine the virtual model of the book, we decided to add a few interactives, as also suggested by collaborators from the Getty and the Huntington. We added a ruler, for example, to measure the size of the book, and also a different kind of magnifying glass that is rectangular, and so it fits better and matches with the rectangular aspect of the page. And we also improve, yes, also, as I mentioned earlier, the original manuscript contains the marks and imprints of 3 metallic badges that were once attached to the parchment in 3 different sections of the book. We thus decided to add an interactive focused on one of these badges, actually on all of these badges, that allows user to learn about the story of the book. So this interactive enables users to engage with 3 different metallic objects, one from the British Museum and 2 that are still in a book in the La Chambre Hours in the National Library of the Netherlands. So we have one large cast badge that is a lover's token in the shape of a heart and definitely doesn't match with the trace of the original badge in the manuscript. And users can learn about the difference between cast and embossed badges. They will be able to try to grab the badge, put it on the page and match it with the imprint. And they will learn about the object itself and about the reasons why that specific object doesn't fit there or does fit. Obviously, we don't know which badges were there. We are speculating, and we are identifying objects that are similar in shape, similar in size, that are reasonably possible options. But obviously, we don't know which badges were there. And in the process of designing this virtual reality experience, and also brainstorming with Getty manuscript curators and conservators, Beth Morrison and Nancy Turner, who is here, and I'm very thankful to, we decided to document in VR the ways in which the original manuscript has changed throughout the centuries due to its history of use, handling, and storage practices. So we experimented with Photoshop and digitally restored some sections of the pages, as you can see here. Essentially, we noticed that the black color has fallen off in the decoration of the margin. And we worked on Photoshop, our students worked on Photoshop to try to restore digitally that color that has fallen off. And then these images have been imported in the virtual reality experience so that we have this interactive here, which is called the restore mode or the aging mode, that allows people to really understand that books have a life and they continue to change during their life. And the more we use them, the more they change. So essentially moving the controllers to the highlighted areas, users can see how the book has changed. So they will see a cleaner margin, for example. They will notice the smudge that is on the lilies in ink in the Annunciation, and they will notice a brown spot that is there but was not originally there. So the idea is to give users a better understanding of the life of books, and also to make them also realize that books were made originally for different contexts and are now in other places. But I'm not thinking of virtual reality as a tool that can replace the examination of manuscripts in person. I'm thinking of VR as an additional tool that can be used for research, teaching, and public outreach. What if virtual reality is the tool that enables us to provide wide access to medieval and Renaissance manuscripts without damaging the originals? What if these virtual reality experiences of original manuscripts can allow people to engage with a manuscript beyond an exhibition glass case? Anyone from anywhere could access a virtual book, and with no experience in handling ancient sources, they could turn the pages of these books and learn about them without knowing how to read Latin or Hebrew, German, or French. I see the potential that virtual reality has. These virtual reality experiences of manuscripts could be used in libraries, special collection departments, museums holding manuscript collections, to teach students how to handle a medieval and Renaissance manuscript safely before they can actually access the original books. The virtual models of these books could become training tools that are less expensive than facsimiles and accessible from anywhere with a virtual reality headset. With their immersive character, these virtual reality experiences can be places for embodied learning and can be used for individual experiences, but also for group-led teaching in the classroom. This is a picture from Lafayette College, where Professor Hupe is currently teaching a course of Renaissance art in this way. So his students, essentially wearing virtual reality headsets, can be virtually in a place he's talking about and discussing. And there are two ways of teach with virtual reality. Either everyone is wearing one of these virtual reality headsets and they can talk. So they can share what they see, and the professor can kind of lead their discovery of the virtual space or of the virtual model of the book. Or the professor can wear the headset and can project what he sees in virtual reality on the screen. So everyone is seeing what he's seeing or they are seeing in the experience. Also, museums have started using virtual reality headsets in the galleries to help general audiences visualize and understand the artwork's original context, as in the case of the recent exhibition about Veronese at the National Gallery in 2022. What if virtual reality can be another way to provide global access to manuscript collections and can perhaps become the place where we continue our research on manuscripts from home? To conclude, in building this virtual reality experience of the USC Book of Hours, which is also a template, as I mentioned, that we can use to build many other virtual reality experiences of many other manuscripts, I realized that both the in-person experience of the original manuscript and the virtual experience of its virtual model determine the directions of my research, inviting me to explore other fields and to know more about medieval badges, begins, lives and devotions, beguinage, manuscript preservation. If on the one hand, my research informed this virtual reality experience, on the other hand, this virtual reality experience itself became my research. I truly believe that virtual reality offers to us new interesting opportunities to reflect on manuscripts, their materiality, use, and their preservation, and also invites us to envision new ways to provoke active cultural learning. Thank you.
So much. I think we have a little bit of time for questions. Yes. Oh, right away. Okay. Yes, please.
I'm gonna carry the.
Oh, thank you, Dot.
Wait, was it?
Great. Yeah.
This thing on? Okay. A couple of questions for Sabrina. First of all, when looking at the model, the sort of size of the virtual object of the book, is that a standard size for any manuscript that will be imported into the virtual space?
No.
It changes based on the dimensions of the book itself?
Because these virtual models are built through photogrammetry, which means that there's a camera in front of the book and the book is rotating and the camera is taking thousands of pictures. Then that will be combined to create the 3D model. We can do that for any book. And it doesn't require, for us, it was a student doing that during the pandemic. She was alone in the lab and we were directing her from home. So that's how it happened. That's how it started. So I think, again, I'm an art historian. I have an interest in digital humanities. I'm not the one who makes this thing happen. I'm the one who kind of inspires the process. But it's feasible and students are doing it with us. So that's encouraging.
Yeah. My other questions are if you've made any considerations to the actual physical feedback that you get when you're interacting with a book, things like haptic feedback, the sounds of the pages turning.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any plan to engage with that side of the experience as well?
Yes, so we are currently finish up phase 2, and we are hoping to apply for a phase 3. Honestly, based on what we have seen while testing the experience with many people, mainly scholars, students, we are hearing loud the desire of creating different experiences for different people. So wide audiences will have certain needs. Scholars will have different needs. And so I think in the next phase, we may consider taking different directions that can address the needs of different people. So like the sound of the parchment, I don't know if it will fit more in the category of wide audiences or scholars. Do scholars care about the sound of the parchment, or they just want to have the virtual model they can use once they are done in the library? And maybe they can keep working on the virtual reality model. Yeah, so that's what we are thinking about now. Thank you.
Thank you for that very fascinating presentation, Sabina. I had a question about scalability and whether or not this is a virtual reality experience or an alternative mode of monograph publishing. Because what I just witnessed was a collectively written monograph that took art historians, paleographers, translators, conservators, in a way that is like a very beautiful sort of thing that I can imagine with a tenure packet saying, all right, yeah, this is kind of a book about a book, kind of, in some ways. And so I'm sort of wondering, you know, without this level of investment and without this level of detail and rigor, how sustainable this is, and are we not just perhaps creating a new canon, a new museum of highly researched objects that then stand in and displace the wild material diversity of what we actually encounter in libraries?
Thank you for your question. I really appreciate it deeply. So we are thinking about the monograph in terms of trying to describe what we have been doing and share with the rest of the world the effort that has been done. And I think that goes together with continuing this process of experimenting and seeing what happens. It's like the technology keeps changing daily. And sometimes I feel like a weird visionary that is hoping for something to happen. But it's exciting. And so I see the monograph as a way to support other people to try doing something similar. We are currently sharing the experience with other institutions, And obviously they need to have someone in the staff who has some tech experience just to recreate the experience. That is not something I could do, but we are creating manuals for every step. So there are manuals that the students are working on and are well done that will guide anyone to recreate everything, the virtual space or the kneeler or whatever is involved. I don't know if I answered fully, but.
Great. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question.
Thanks. And I think it's an interesting juxtaposition of papers because what Dominique showed us is predicated on a massive number of digitizations, each consisting of a very large number of photographs. This is in some ways a variant on the previous question. And what you showed us is perhaps no less effort, but focused on a single object. I'm hugely impressed. And it's in that context that I want to voice not skepticism, but a certain concern. I don't expect you to tell us how much it cost to get this far. But clearly a number of grants. I'm thinking of the hundreds of thousands of manuscripts that have yet to be digitized. And obviously resources are limited. And so I ask myself, what would be of greater value to the scholarly community? Now, obviously your project has the advantage of looking beyond our narrow sphere. But I think that is a question worth raising. And on another note, I think that it's important to recognize that in any such environment, one is not simply reconstructing and recreating. One is effectively creating a fiction. Now, in some ways, you could argue that all historical research engages in a fiction of one kind or another. But to give a concrete example, again, I'm wowed by what you've showed us, but I don't think that a church at this time would have been filled with chairs. There would have been no pews. There certainly wouldn't have been chairs. And so what you've shown us is something that never existed at all. And the music that you had playing in the background was of the period, but it's not the kind of music one would have heard in church. So I think that I think we need to tread very carefully.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So first of all, I've been thinking a lot about the use that scholars can do, because it's much easier to think of virtual reality in a classroom or in a museum or in special collection departments. What happened, for example, in Princeton, we tested it with some scholars, and we created essentially a second virtual reality experience of one of the earliest copies of the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew, the Leningrad Codex. And so we let some scholars from Princeton try the experience and see what happened. And they were in the kitchen, and one of them was in the experience and the other one was looking at the experience in the laptop. And they started chanting together and noticing how the text is written, or notice that peculiar thing. So it became an opportunity for them to think together. And in the future, we may also imagine having multiple manuscripts in the same virtual space. So what if we could compare two manuscripts, one from the Morgan and one from the Getty, one next to the other, and work together in the virtual space? We're not there yet. I understand, and I'm a traditional scholar, so I totally understand the concern. I'm just envisioning possibilities. That's one part of the question. The second half, you were asking, well, the cost of the project was not super high, because the first grant was $50,000 from the NIH, and it was a level 1 from the advancement grants. And the second level was 150,000. And so that was the money that was spent on phase 1 and phase 2. And then I lost track of the second part of your, the space. That's very important to me. So we started working on this during the pandemic. We were able to travel to Ghent. We realized that the beguinage spaces were not accessible. They are places that are rented by the city and everyone is living inside. They remodeled the spaces, so no beguines rooms were actually available. We had modern reconstructions in museums or other beguinage, full of furniture, modern furniture that doesn't really fit. Anyway, the church was an option because the church was accessible. We went there, we took the pictures, and we realized that the church has drastically changed. So it's full of furnitures. There's also a statue of a beguine that is 6'7". It's a ginormous statue of a beguine that is still there, and the priest is trying to get rid of it, and it's still there. So how do we, if we want to reconstruct a space, we need to get rid, as you are saying, of all the modern furniture, all the other layers, Baroque layers that were not there in the 15th century. So that seemed to be a very hard process. So we end, and also the church and the book of hours, I know. Yes, maybe a beguine was going to church and was bringing with her the book. But most of these books were probably used in a private space, right? In their private devotions. So why the church? So that's why, that's the thinking that brought us to start from scratch and reconstructing the space. Now, my dream is in the next phase, maybe we find a better match between the manuscripts, maybe more than one, and the space. And then we can have a true experience that is correct, historically correct, and maybe a little bit easier to do than whatever we have been experiencing in this phase. That's
Sure. Yeah, one more quick question from Nick.
I had a question for Dominique as well, and absolutely fascinating. Thank you for both of these talks. And I'm just wondering on a technical level, so the AI for detecting these books, is it reliant? I mean, it's reliant on high quality photography. It's reliant on IIIF. Was the corpus entirely from the Bibliothèque Nationale or from Gallica? And what happens if you pull in digitizations that have been done to sort of slightly different standards from other parts? Does that affect the results?
No, well, there is something that first it's through the images are indeed from high quality digitizations and available through IIIF protocol. And so it's manuscripts from all over the world, so from Poland, from the States, from wherever. The 1,200 manuscripts. For the quality of the images and if there are deviation according to the photographing, the picturing technique, actually that's really not relevant for our research, because in the process all images are reduced to 640 pixels width and height square. So it's less than what you would capture with a phone. And even there is one manuscript that is, I don't remember where, but there is a page that has been photographed. Yes, it's in the e-codices, that has been photographed half turned just to show how the manuscript is. And there is a book on a miniature on this page, and it was recognized as well, although the page is distorted. So that's really not an issue, I would say.
All right, great. Well, thank you. I invite everyone to continue the conversation and thank our speakers. We will be reconvening at 2:15, but there will be a book display in Lee Library, which is behind the hall that direction. And then within the pavilion, there will be the VR experience, but there's only 3 headsets. So please rotate, get lunch, come back. And thank you all so much.